Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about time is not on your side, how to respond to things when they have a time issue that's overwhelming. Our presenter today is Karen Masullo. She's the Executive Vice President here at Firestorm. We'd like you to become our friend. Firestorm Solutions on Facebook, Twitter, we're Firestorm Soul. There's a hashtag. Hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We'd like to remind you the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments. Please consult your local attorney and local counsel to make sure that they agree with the things that we're saying here, and do not interpret these items discussed today as legal advice or legal opinion. Today's webinar is underwritten by our very good friends at the Georgia Independent School Association. They've been sponsoring these webinars now for about 5 years, and we're delighted to have their support. We've attended a number of their conventions. We have been key speakers at their meetings and have had good presentations. You can go to firestorm.com and you can watch past webinars in this series, and you can register for future webinars. Dr. Jackson is not able to be with us today. He's out assisting some of the clients of the Georgia Independent School Association, but we appreciate his continuing support. As I mentioned, our presenter today is Karen Masullo, our Chief Executive Officer and Executive Vice President. Karen has a deep and long experience level in social media, monitoring, how to craft messages, how to respond to situations. She's a very knowledgeable speaker and well known in the field. Karen, over to you, please.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. And I just had to look at my phone to make sure I wasn't on mute. I hate those times when you're just sitting there talking to mute the mute button. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you to Georgia Independent Schools Association for underwriting this session for you. And I know that many of you are on spring break, so I do appreciate your taking the time from what may be your break period to have a cup of coffee, maybe sit down with your teams and listen and talk a little bit about how you're going to message and communicate in a crisis. And I am going to show some examples that may not be specific to a school organization, but we'll talk about some that are. And if you have any questions during this session, I will try my best to get to them, although this session is timed almost exactly at 45 minutes. If I talk really fast, I can get you out a little early. But if you have any questions, you can use the GoToWebinar chat function in the little dashboard tool that should be on your screen. And if I cannot get to that question, we will certainly follow up post-webinar and personally email an answer or a response to you. And you can always contact us at webinars@firestorm.com, and the brilliant Bill Baker, who is your moderator today, or I will respond as quickly as possible. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. Just do a search on Karen Masullo. There's only 2 of us. One of them is my cousin. And you'll hopefully recognize me by that picture, although I certainly need a new one. So thanks for joining today, and let's move forward. And what we're talking about today is a follow-up from our first 2 sessions of the year. So in January, we did a review of what was going on in the world in 2016 and what we thought we were going to need to look at for private schools and independent schools in 2017. And we talked to you about benchmarking. How do you benchmark your preparedness? And thankfully, because Georgia Independent Schools Association has been such a wonderful partner for us for the last 4 years or so, we have really 2 wonderful benefits to you. And I really appreciate you joining us on this call today, and I want to remind you that you get two really huge benefits that you can take advantage of at any time. The first is we are happy to get that benchmarking process started with you by doing a self-guided assessment with you. It takes about an hour. It's an interview on the phone. And we just sort of go through a conversation where we are also actively doing an assessment that we have created through an online proprietary tool. From that, we're going to get a report back that will help you identify where it is you need to improve the most. Normally that costs $2,500, and for any Georgia Independent School Association, or if you have attended this session, you're not a member of Georgia Independent Schools but were invited, you just need to email us at webinars@firestorm.com and let us know you'd like to schedule that appointment, and we waive the fee. The second benefit to you is something we talked about all through 2016, and that is BRTHA, Firestorm's proprietary program for behavioral risk threat assessment. And because of our relationship with the Georgia Independent Schools, we are making the first year fee for the license for BRTHA no fee to you. And that's a bit more of a complex program. It's brilliant. I've seen it in action. And it does take some training and some coordination. So please reach out to us, and we'd love to talk to you about that. And today we're going to talk to you about what happens in crisis when minutes matter and seconds count. We know that during a crisis, and a crisis can be just about anything, almost everything you find out in the first moments, other than maybe the core detail, is probably going to be wrong. And I'm going to give you a very simple example of how everything is wrong, things escalate very quickly, and how one small detail in communication can actually create a secondary crisis for you if you get it wrong. We have a school system that we have worked with for quite a number of years as a client, and they had a situation a couple of days ago as some really bad storms moved through their area, where a tree came down. And the tree came down and took out some power lines, and they lost power in one of their elementary schools. And they were trying to decide whether they were going to go ahead and hold class on backup power, hold school on backup power or not, how they were going to do lunches. They were just sort of making those decisions. And they put out a message that said, because a power line came down at approximately 5 o'clock that morning due to storms, they were making the decision whether to hold school or not. And that was an internal communication. The information had come from that tree had come down, had come from local law enforcement officials to the parent liaison for the schools. And what was not clear or made clear was whether the liaison called the law enforcement, whether law enforcement called the liaison, and the communication between the liaison and the law enforcement was at 5-something in the morning, 5 a.m. However, it turns out that the tree came down at 1 a.m. in the morning. So this communication went out, and it was a seemingly small detail. The communication went out, and like all communications that you will issue from now till the end of computers and the internet, someone shared that message on Facebook. That internal message was shared on Facebook. and a board member who's also, or it's a city council member, something like that, glommed on to the idea that, well, the tree couldn't have come down at 5 a.m. in the morning because we lost power at 1. And so you guys are wrong, and you're wrong in your communications. And this tiny little detail that was included for no reason, it didn't enhance the message in any way. It didn't clarify the message in any way. It just added content to a place where content wasn't needed, created a secondary crisis for a school. So the message here today is that we want to make sure you understand the attributes of a crisis and are prepared in your messaging for when one occurs. This is a great exercise for your teams. It's a good time to buy a pizza and have a little in-service and sit down around a table for a couple of hours and say, okay, let's whiteboard this, folks. What could happen? Because we know the main attributes of a crisis are there's an escalating flow of events. They ebb and flow. And the reason for this is, well, as new information is found, right, new fears or new solutions or new challenges occur. So as new information evolves, also media is going to pick up on that new tidbits of information, and they will resurface your crisis whether you want it resurfaced or not. So there you will see insufficient and inaccurate information coming out and coming to you. You will hear employees will come to you and say, I heard such and such. You're going to be getting calls from employees saying, are we supposed to come in? I heard the building burned down, when actually there was a trash can fire at the far end of the football field. So, and I know that there are some of you sitting around the tables right now. By the way, you all look fabulous today. But I know some of you are sitting around shaking your head. Yes, I remember when that happened. You know that happens. And you're under intense scrutiny because of it. And you're not just under intense scrutiny from maybe your local newspaper or media outlets or national media outlets, depending on the type of situation, but from your board, your community leaders, your students, your parents, your employees. Everyone is going to armchair quarterback your crisis. So you need to show your leadership skills by being prepared, because preparedness is a brand attribute for your school. And you should put that in your office, and every time somebody walks in, you should say, read that. Preparedness is a brand attribute, and that's why this school is going to be prepared, because we cannot afford loss of command and control during a crisis, and there will be some. If you've ever been in the middle of a very serious crisis, a workplace violence incident, a school violence incident, a natural disaster where Mother Nature does not care how you feel about the crisis that's occurring, it's chaotic, it's frightening, and no matter how prepared you are, it's still pretty scary. So you cannot completely be in command of a crisis all the time, but the more prepared and trained you are, the more set up for success you will be, because we know how you respond can create that second crisis. And your brand and reputation are going to be under attack whether you know it or not. Whether you may think this is not a big deal, and suddenly it can escalate into becoming a big deal. You know, I remember a few years ago, Mattel, the makers of Barbie, had to shut down their Barbie fan club Facebook page that had, I don't know, like 7 million little girls and boys that visited the page to hear all of the new updates on what was going on in Barbie's life. And they had to shut their page down because the packaging they used for some of their Barbie dolls was made from paper that was made from wood, from a protected tree in a protected forest. And for that period of time, it was about a 4-month period of time, an eco-terrorist group decided they were going to be the focus. And out of nowhere, the people who managed the little Barbie Happy Life page had no idea what was going on, and they were suddenly inundated with not thousands, hundreds of thousands of messages, derisive and just an onslaught of negative messaging. It happens in seconds. They weren't prepared, and it was misdirected at this fan page, but that's what happened. The same thing can happen to you, no matter how large or small your educational institution is. But the most important thing to understand during this time is that everything that happens, whether it's a natural disaster or something more or less serious, every crisis that you're going to experience involves humans. Every crisis is a human crisis. And somehow someone is going to be affected, and they need to be at the top of our minds. And certainly our schools educate and protect, but also our employees, our staff, our teachers, our volunteers that are in our schools that might be on our campus at any given time, others that we work with in community, programs that we run, rent out spaces on our campuses or in our buildings, they can be affected. Families, the community, every crisis is a human crisis, and we need to consider those people whenever we're doing crisis messaging. That's not just external to them, but internally as well, because everything you communicate internally today has the propensity to be shared externally. The challenge for many folks in a crisis is that we have the assumption that silence equals guilt. And sometimes you just need to step back and not communicate immediately until you have the facts correct and know you are allowed to communicate. So in order to facilitate that process, then, you need to have prepared messaging so that at least you can control the exact facts of a situation before you elaborate on any next steps. But don't be pushed to communicate by those sort of informal coaches we all have in our lives. The informal coaches you may have may be your board, other employees, your superintendent team, your assistant superintendents. However your organization is structured, there's someone who may be quietly encouraging you to comment when you are not ready to comment yet. Your mother might call you and say, I think you need to go to the papers with this. We need to be careful because you don't want to be surprised when something you said turns around on you and becomes, again, that secondary crisis. You know, we can look at some things and say, well, it's kind of humorous sometimes when an error happens. And many of you know that during the Oscars, the wrong envelope was somehow given. I find it hard to believe that of all of the things that had to have been done that night, and you are given just one task, you have this envelope or you have this envelope. Make sure you give the right envelope to the right person. I got to think somebody said, whatever happens if we give the wrong envelope? Do we have a backup plan for that? Because that's exactly what happened. And while the two accountants who were actually involved in giving the wrong envelope are not allowed back to the Academy Awards ever again, it did shine a bit of an interesting light on one of the largest accounting firms in the world. And did it kill their brand? No, but it didn't help. It was embarrassing. And so we don't want to be the butt of anyone's comedy. Now, I'm showing you this next slide not to be salacious in any way, but to remind us that as many times as we say, those of you on the phone today, those of you with your teams in a room, you're sitting around saying, it's okay, that'll never happen at our school. We don't have anyone in our school who would ever do anything dumb. We are perfect. Now, I'd like you to be, but this Visitors Bureau thought they were as well. And no one expected an adult content video to be posted on their Instagram account by their 61-year-old manager of external communications. Now, this poor woman was devastated. It was an absolute accident. It came from lack of training. We never use the same tools to manage our personal social accounts as we do our business social accounts. Ever, ever, ever. I don't. I've been involved in social media since LinkedIn was a baby, and I have never used the same tools. You just don't do it, whether you have something to hide or not. So not only was this Visitors Bureau deeply embarrassed because this happened late at night, nobody was aware of it till the next morning, it went viral, but this poor employee was devastated. She lost her job, she was horribly embarrassed in her community. There was a real human crisis that happened here. We know that when there is a crisis, the person held responsible is sitting in your seat right now. I don't know who you are. You can be anyone from a teacher to an administrator in your school. We're all responsible for what goes on in the walls, but the buck stops at the top seat. And it may result in financial fines, financial obligations. It may result in a loss of funding to your organization. You may lose the support of alumni and alumni support financially. You may lose enrollment for coming years because of how you handle a crisis. You know, I include this one example because, again, we have this mentality that our employees would never do anything like that. Well, we saw recent examples. There was a mayor in West Virginia that actually supported a very racist and unconscionable tweet that someone made. She lost her job. And this is Dan Grillo. And Dan Grillo posted this message after President Trump's State of the Union address, honoring a fallen soldier and his family. And I think for any of us that watched it for a full 2 minutes, there was a standing ovation as this fallen soldier's spouse gazed skyward. And I don't feel that there's anything more disrespectful than this type of a comment in that type of a situation. No matter how you feel politically, this is not an appropriate statement to make, although it's a free country. And this woman's husband died for this man's right to be able to say, sorry, Owen's wife, you're not helping yourself or your husband's memory by standing there and clapping like an idiot. Trump just used you. Mr. Grillo was fired for that tweet. And the company that he worked for wasn't expecting to have to do that. You know, there's an old, I'm an old girl, and there's an old Monty Python sketch where the Spanish Inquisition shows up, and they always say no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Well, no one expects their employees to do something really stupid, so they wake up the next morning and have to take action to avoid a major crisis. But again, this went viral. Every major news organization picked this up. Phones rang off the hook. This company, while they are involved in politics and are no stranger to the media, were overwhelmed themselves. So every time we say our employees would never do something like that, please understand they might accidentally do so. And last, you know, that the buck always stops at the top. So it's important to understand that we need to protect our schools and our organizations from being attacked from any front. If you get an opportunity, I wanted to recommend a book to you, and it's not a book that we've written, which is unusual for me to recommend one that we haven't put out ourselves, but it's by author John Ronson, and I had written an article myself on a couple of instances over the past few years where one employee has accidentally created a media firestorm and shamed their own organizations. One organization that had only 30 employees and was a special educational school and home for late teenage youth with learning disabilities. Sorry, I couldn't remember exactly how they described themselves. And the media firestorm that one of their employees caused on this little organization with only 30 employees, and the brilliant way that the head of that organization handled it is included in this book. And there has been a change. We went from one period when social media was really bubbling up, you know, in 2008 when Twitter came out, and you know, there was a lot of enthusiasm about all of the wonderful things that could happen with social media, and then everybody jumped on the let's go see someone fail bus. And we love it. We run from one side of the street to another following those people who have a propensity to fail on social media. Maybe a politician who posts semi-clothed images of themselves on the web. It's something that we just seem to enjoy watching for. And we've moved now. We got bored with just watching people fail. So now we quickly rush to blame and shame. And that public shaming, the new scarlet letter of our age, is an interesting phenomena. And the kids in your school are willing participants, not out of any malintent, but simply because this is the world that they are growing up in. And there has been a significant loss of innocence as a result. And next month we are going to be talking about that. I'm going to be doing our webinars next month specifically around the subject of predictive intelligence, behavioral risk, and what we are seeing, especially in the age of live streaming, Periscope and Facebook Live and other tools, YouNow especially, that allow our 9-year-old kids to be open to the vulnerabilities of the Internet. So read that book and then join us next month as we explore that in more depth. I wanted to give you an article from Forbes, 10 Leadership Blind Spots. And if you're a leader in your school, if you're a leader of your classroom, if you're a leader of your family, one of the things that Forbes says we can look at, especially going forward in 2017, is basically don't trust anything. We've seen this happen. We've seen news come out now. We all have to say, is this real news or is this fake news? And we have to go look for it. And we have no idea if the sources we're looking at are real or fake. It's a very thin line today between what is real and what is an illusion. And one of those is don't trust your ability to control the message. Now, we don't want to give everybody else the ability to do it, but don't trust that you can just wing it. You may be the best public speaker in the Georgia Independent School System, in the Georgia Independent School Association ever. But if someone suddenly shoves a camera in your face and then 13 other people follow with news trucks pulling up in front of your school, with parents demanding answers, with students demanding answers, with local community attacking you for the way you've handled something, are you going to be able to just wing it from there? Why bother? Why do it? Why wing it? Why not be prepared, or as prepared as you can be? Why not set yourself up for success as much as you can? Jim Satterfield tells a story. I'm sure you've heard it. It was during 9/11, during the tragedy of 9/11. Jim was the CEO of, Jim Satterfield, our CEO, was the CEO of a company. And everybody got into the conference room after the tragedy, and we're trying to decide what to do, what direction to give employees. And Jim said, you know, parents are going to want to get their kids from school. They're going to want to talk to them. They have relatives that may be traveling. People are going to be concerned. Let's tell our employees that they can go home, that if they want to go home, they can just absolutely go home. And let's try to help them get out in an orderly fashion so they don't get stuck in traffic for years. But let's go ahead and help facilitate that. So his human resource director went back to her office. She was really rattled, really shaken up, and she wrote an email message and sent it out to all global employees, and it said, if you want to live, leave. You know, she meant to type, if you want to leave, leave, but she was upset. She was nervous. She didn't have anything prepared. And she was devastated. She was so embarrassed. So on top of her stress and her anxiety because of what had just happened to our country, she bears the burden of knowing that she sent out this message that really scared people. We don't want that to happen to our employees, right? We want to set our people up for success. Now, Firestorm works with a lot of schools, and we help these schools when it comes to social media monitoring and the aggregation of data that's public, that's out there. Really, that's all we do. Is we have a big listening ear, and we pull in all of these different conversations. We filter out the noise and are able to give in the aggregate to our schools any behaviors of concern that we see that need to be addressed. And we had a situation with a 17-year-old boy who was threatening an organization, and he was threatening people and an organization. And he was threatening that something would happen after a football game at a specific time. And the way that message was seen, it was, at the time they were not a client of ours, they are now, but the way that message was seen was through a marketing group, people that are trained to send out messages and get people to engage. Well, the way a marketer is trained is not the way your crisis communications people need to be trained, unless you decide to cross-train your marketers so they also understand how to respond when they see a threat. Because a marketer by instinct will engage. And this organization told their folks, thanks for letting us know there's a threat, we've got somebody, you know, involved in this, and good job, keep us posted if you see anything else. That was the direction they gave to that team. Well, that's not the right direction. The right direction is do not engage, because what happened next was the marketing team engaged. And when they engaged, they amped up the threat. It wasn't their fault. They had not been set up for success. So we want to make sure that we help you identify who is looking at threats for your organization. And once they find them, do they know how to manage them? Do they know what to do next? Do they know who to escalate it to? And it does no good if a threat surfaces and it surfaces through a social channel, and you need to respond or to you need to respond or become involved in some way, and the username and passwords for that are with somebody on spring break skiing in Switzerland. So important things to be aware of. And when you're communicating, it's important to understand the nuance of speech and communication. And remember, we don't have to tell people the time the tree came down if it's not relevant to our message. We don't want to confuse messaging, and the reason is because confusion costs time. You're already confused in the middle of a crisis. If you get a notification from another school that someone in your employ or someone who has been in your employ may be suspected of inappropriate behavior at some point in their career, and that person is in your building now or has been in your building, the first thing you do is say to yourself, oh my God, what do I do? Do I tell parents? Do I interview students? What years was it? How far back do we have to go? Do I have to call law enforcement? Are they using our computers? There's a lot of information that goes through your head, right? Well, having all of that information go through your head when you're learning about the crisis is not the best use of your time in the first moments of crisis. So let's sit down today or tomorrow or before the crisis happens with your team or your person or yourself and say, let me ask myself these questions today so that I am prepared tomorrow should a situation arise. And if we are very fortunate, we will never have to use this messaging that I'm going to create, but if we ever have to use it, at least I'm going to have this part of the process taken care of. We're talking about planning and message maps, understanding how to communicate, what to communicate, and when to communicate it ahead of time. When an actual crisis occurs, it may be completely different than what you've mapped out for. But the very exercise of mapping out the message gives you a template to work from because it's easier to edit than it is to create. These plans and message maps are designed to buy you time when you need it, when you need to be quiet and think what your next step is in a logical, safe manner to protect your school, your brand, your people, your community, your students, etc. Identify your risks, develop your plans, train your people, and then exercise those plans. Test them so that if a crisis does occur, you know who your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, if you have the right people in the right roles. If you don't stress test those, it's not going to work. Now, we understand that stress testing is challenging and that everyone right now is doing, I don't know how many drills a year. You're doing fire drills, you're doing earthquake drills, you're doing hurricane drills, you're doing evacuation drills, you're doing lockdown, lockouts. There are all kinds of things that you have to do, and I admire the fact that we get any teaching done in any school in this country at all. And so what we've done to help facilitate some of this for you is we've started, Firestorm has created 2-hour virtual stress tests. We do 6 a year. Our next one is April 6th. We're going to do that on cyber breach. What do you do if someone uses your network for either the transmission of inappropriate content or if someone hacks into your system and uses your machines as slave machines for something else that they might be doing that's nefarious. And we present 4 scenarios in these, 2 for business, 2 for schools. And it's a great way for you in only a 2-hour period to grab your students, to grab your teachers or your team and stress test these scenarios. We've had a lot of schools send us pictures of themselves around the table. Thank you for those of you on the call that have done that. And we look forward to more because it really makes us understand that we are doing something important for you. So if you can't have somebody come in and do a tabletop exercise and your budget doesn't allow that, please join us for these stress tests, because the last thing that we want to have happen is for anyone in your organization or external to your organization to armchair quarterback and say, if only we had known. You know, except for this, we could have done that. And everyone talks about school violence because that's what grabs the media headline. But we all know there are many other crises that occur on a daily basis in every school across this country that require handling and management of your message, the media, where it is being distributed, how it is monitored, and again, we're going to talk about that next month, along with the metrics for understanding and measuring how effective your response is, and whether negativity is spiking or decreasing or people are unclear. We want to make sure that through clear identification of your stakeholders and their concerns, and you asking yourself why you're communicating, that you're able to address the risk or fear perceptions of your audience. You do that through preparing clear and concise messaging that is prepared ahead of time and targeted to specific fears and concerns and audiences. If you'd like help with anything like this, we'd love to do this. Reach out to us. I look forward to working with you. We start with the simplest of message mapping, and that's Roxanne the Wonder Dog barking in the background saying, Karen, you're almost out of time. We start with the simplest of message mapping, the question, concern, impact, stakeholders, and key messaging. And then we draft up scenarios that could occur and what the information might be around it. A tree fell on a power line. That's not the core message. The core message is the school has to close for the day. Why? The core message is school is delayed for the day. Why? The core message is that classroom XYZ is not available for an extended period of time. Why? We have to shelter in place. We have to evacuate. All of these types of things need to be communicated, so let's go ahead and communicate ahead of time. And if you don't own your social media channels today, and if you don't know who manages your social media channels today, and if you don't share the username and passwords in those channels, so if those people aren't available, you personally can message out, then you're focused on the wrong things. Don't focus on what to do when the shot rings out. You're focused on the wrong thing if you're not preparing to make sure that never happens. In your messaging, once you've identified your stakeholder, their questions or concern, and your key messaging, we then want to make sure that you have supporting information in response to follow-up and other questions that will inevitably come. And that's where people get really tripped up. They might know the initial facts of a situation. They might know originally that there was a recall on food that's used in the cafeteria. What they're not ready for is that second question by a reporter with a microphone that says, why did you allow students in your school to be poisoned? You need to be prepared for that question and have your answer scripted and ready to go. Because setting your team, setting yourself up for success was going to allow you to continuously deliver clear and timely messages throughout a crisis. And these messages raise your visibility and the awareness that your brand is prepared and has the attribute of preparedness, which is very attractive to future students. You're better able to participate in news conferences, social media, and via press releases should you need to issue one if you are prepared and ready to go. Again, doesn't have to be exact. It can't be, but it's easier to edit than it is to create. And you're going to be able to correct any errors that were made in the media by others. This is the Firestorm Crisis Management Performance Maturity Rating Model. It is one of my favorite things that we have here. I have it in my office. I reference it. I encourage my own team to strive to be stage 4 strategic in our approach to managing our own internal challenges, projects, and tasks. We want open communication with clear decision-making, with clearly defined roles and responsibilities, so there's no confusion. And we want to make sure that we have predefined processes and pre-established practice processes and procedures. It makes us become more efficient so that we can respond to decisions we have to make on a timely basis. And when we do need to message about what we're doing internally, not just in crisis, but in times of success, we're much more articulate in that as well. What can you do next? You can contact us for that assessment that's being underwritten by your association with this webinar for the Georgia Independent Schools Association. Then you need to align your crisis communication plan with best practices as discussed and develop a strategy for all types of media outlets, including social media. And start and then hopefully finalize your crisis communication plan that includes message mapping. Now, you can contact Firestorm, and we will offer support for any of these projects, and we'd love to discuss our Crisis Stop or our Bertha license with you. Crisis Stop allows you, because you're a member of the Georgia Independent Schools Association, to call us, and we'll talk to you for an hour, and we will help you stop whatever crisis it is from evolving into a secondary crisis. Also, you want to look at your insurance and current response plans to see what your coverage is, and then, of course, stress test your plan. And please join us for that April 6th from 2 until 4. What next? In about 24 hours, we should have a brief of this session uploaded on our website. You can find it at firestorm.com/briefs. And it should be up on your YouTube channel for Georgia Independent Schools Association in about 2 hours from now. And you'll receive an email from GoToWebinar that will point you in the right direction to receive that. I want to thank again our sponsors at Georgia Independent Schools Association and you for taking time from your spring break period to listen to me ramble on today. I look forward to talking to you next month about predictive intelligence and aggregate monitoring, and that will end our session for today. Thanks. Have a great day, and goodbye.